If you open a map that tracks ships, zoom in on the Indian Ocean, then turn on live tracking, the vital arteries of global commerce become obvious.
Without access to it, trade between Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia would basically grind to a halt.
These are the choke points, the critical passages that fuel the world economy. For India, they're non-negotiable, carrying almost all its trade and energy.
Since the Indian Ocean is named after India, it is quite integral to India's worldview.
But it's also important to another giant. China is pouring billions into ports, infrastructure, and naval expansion. And that has India alarmed.
China is not violating any international rules, and China is not infringing upon India's interest. Therefore, they have to change the mentality.
What were once obscure specks in the vast Indian Ocean are now the silent targets in a looming struggle, one that could choke global trade and tilt the balance of power.
There's increased competition between the US and China, between China and India as well, vying for influence within that.
President Donald Trump's shift in foreign policy has cast uncertainty on the US's role in the region.
I will put America first.
And open doors for China. At the center of it all are tiny countries like Mauritius, which find themselves courted by powers that might once have overlooked them.
Mauritius is known for its beautiful white sand beaches, the lagoon, the great five-star hotels, and the hospitality of Mauritians. But it's more than that. Mauritius controls 2.3 million kilometers of economic exclusive zone in the Indian Ocean. It sits in the middle of the maritime trade, so it shows how strategic, important Mauritius is.
Its heat sweetens those sugar canes on which the island's economy depends.
When I was born, the country was living off sugarcane plantation. We saw a kind of a surge of interest from the early 2000s from China. It shifted from China to India, leveraging on the fact that Mauritius is also known as Little India or Chota Bharat, as we say it. And these countries do help us, be it China, be it India. So it's helping the country to prosper.
But just beyond these pristine shores, military bases. On the Agalega Islands, a territory governed by Mauritius, India has constructed a new airstrip to land surveillance aircraft, in large part to track Chinese activity. Meanwhile, Diego Garcia, another island Mauritius has sovereignty over, has proved strategic for US and UK military power, with a base there since the 1970s.
When powers become global, one thing they want to do is kind of spec the globe with military bases to project power internationally. And when you think about that kind of network, it's something that China is starting to set its sights on.
But China is not alone. India's Agalega base signals a shift in its global ambitions too, driven by economic expansion and tensions with China.
India and China have had ties dating back millennia. They had a brief period of friendship in the 1950s, but the two countries fought a border war in 1962, and the relationship honestly has never quite recovered. It's characterized by deep mistrust, a deep sense of insecurity on Delhi's part. And in fact, in 2020, the two countries fought a series of border skirmishes which resulted in loss of life on both sides. If the dispute between India and China was primarily land-based in the past, now both countries are thinking about how that extends into the maritime domain.
4 of the world's 6 most important maritime choke points are in the Indian Ocean, making it absolutely critical to global trade.
When you think about countries like India and China, the dependency is really quite startling. India relies on the ocean for something like 95% of its international trade, 80% of its energy.
In fact, 40% of the world's offshore petroleum is found in the Indian Ocean, and nearly half of oil products transiting through these choke points are received by India and China.
When Beijing looks at its energy security, its ability to procure oil, for example, it's very heavily dependent on the Middle East, to some extent Africa, and nearly all of that goes through this choke point called the Strait of Malacca.
Blocking any of these routes would have a huge impact on global trade, creating a potential flashpoint for conflict. But China has seemingly been preparing. As part of its global Belt and Road Initiative, it has asserted its regional influence with multi-billion-dollar infrastructure investments across the Indian Ocean.
You can see China's influence in infrastructure, the airport, the dam, the headquarters of the National Radio TV station.
In Mauritius, they've also installed surveillance cameras made by Chinese telecom giant Huawei.
You will find that all these projects are economic projects, which of course are welcomed by these countries.
Alongside its aggressive military buildup in the South China Sea, China is also extending its reach into the Indian Ocean. Chinese warships have been sent on anti-piracy missions and billions funneled into 46 commercial ports, 36 of which can host naval vessels. On Africa's east coast, China built its first military base in Djibouti and is expanding its naval footprint in Cambodia, giving it the potential to project power from both sides of the Indian Ocean.
The rate at which China is building ships, aircraft, missiles, you have actually a dramatic expansion of Chinese military power.
It's a growing concern for Indian policymakers who know the Indian Ocean is more than just a trade route.
The idea that an external power, and these days it's increasingly Beijing that they're thinking of, could shut that down or somehow hinder it, is a really big threat to India's national security and its hopes of rising.
95% of international trade is maritime trade. It should not be anybody's privilege to have a so-called sphere of influence. That kind of mentality should be gone. This is 21st century.
As China pushes in, the power that has dominated the Indian Ocean for decades is in retreat.
We have more breaking news on this Friday night. Secretary of State Marco Rubio now ordering the U.S. to immediately stop almost all foreign aid and supplies, pending a review.
The U.S. cuts to foreign assistance are like a gift to China. The U.S. had been investing aid in democracy promotion, protecting civil society, health, education, transparent economic development. Now that many of those programs have gone away, it really is allowing China an opportunity to come in and fill the gaps.
While the US still controls more military installations than any other nation, with about 750 across at least 80 countries, President Trump's foreign policy has meant scaling back on global defense commitments. And that puts more pressure on the US base on Diego Garcia to counter China's growing presence.
This is the only base where the U.S. has bombers in the Indo-Pacific region, aside from Guam. And it's an area where countries like India would not want the Chinese to get access and get a hold on.
As a result, India is flexing its military might. Alongside the airstrip in Agalega, it has commissioned a new base on Minicoy Island and opened its first offshore military logistics hub at Duqm Port in Oman. It's also working harder to win hearts and minds around the Indian Ocean.
We are at the main metro station in Port Louis, the capital. The whole project has been funded through grants from India. It showcases India's investment in a small island nation like Mauritius.
While China continues to dominate regional investment, not all of its projects have delivered.
See this picture? That's what Jin Fei was meant to be. There should have been a 5-star hotel, luxury apartment with this sprawling leisure area with swimming pools, but it never happened.
If you go to Jin Fei, this was supposed to be a zone that would mirror the kind of special economic zones that China has dotted along its southern coast and which helped to project China and to kickstart this boom in its economy. It's fair to say that Jin Fei fell well short of expectations.
We can also make mistakes, but nobody could doubt China's good intention and China's real investment. There is a lot of talk about how the world has changed. But one thing that is indisputable is that the international geopolitics is moving from the west to the east. So this kind of collective rise in Asia is happening. And I believe this is what our late leader, Deng Xiaoping, has described, the Asian century.
I think what the future holds in the Indian Ocean region is continued competition between India and China for influence. I think China will continue to press forward. It will continue to invest economically, politically, militarily in the countries surrounding India.
What India tries to bring is really an alternative model which is not extractive, which is not exploitative, where you can build a mutually beneficial relationship. If that US does really downsize its role in this part of the world, then I think there will be much more jockeying for position between the regional powers. I would suspect there will be more conflict.
Like it or not, China plays the long game. They're very, very patient. They'll wait. Or maybe the next opportunity would be Chinese, or maybe American, or maybe Indian. It's no clear-cut picture right now. Who is winning, who is losing?